It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. Logan, how we doing for a mailbag edition of the show?
I'm always juiced for a mailbag, man. We were just talking about that. It's a lot of fun to kind of see what people are curious about and see if we can illuminate the fan questions, I guess. So.
Yeah, illuminate, answer, provide a joke
Whatever.
or two.
Yeah.
By the way, I had some fun yesterday morning. I do a live stream show with my buddy Tony on Mondays, and we did what we call the internet's fastest mock draft. We picked the entire first round, and we had like a 30-second time cap on each pick. And I literally was like, if you want insight, analysis, this is not the show for you. That show's called Take Command. There's a guy named Logan Paulsen in that. Oh, sorry. Oh, other way. Yeah, that way. In that box right there. And he's played 10 years in the league and is very smart. Today we have Tony. So we're here for jokes and entertainment. And so we did the entire thing. It's probably less than 15 minutes, to be honest. We steamed through that thing.
That's pretty good.
It was a good time.
Yeah.
But we will do some more mocks, obviously, over the next couple of weeks. We will eventually do one where we make every pick of the first round. We've kind of been more Commanders focused, where we use the simulators to get through and just pick the Commanders. But we will do a full first round mock, at least one before the draft. And yesterday doing that was a lot of fun. We'll take a little longer than 30 seconds per pick, but for some of them, probably not much. As for today, mailbag question, starting with Eddie from Laurel, who said, "Hey, Craig, I have a question for you. Why haven't we reached out to Elijah Moore for a vet minimum contract? He's Jaden's age, been more productive than all of our number 2 targets here in 2024, but we offer Gallup a deal. Is there any major red flags in this guy? Any insight?" And this is a great question, I think, because one, to realize that Elijah Moore, who's getting ready to go on his second contract, is the same age as Jaden Daniels.
Crazy.
Is wild. And again, like Jaden being older wound up being a huge benefit last year. I don't think that really takes down his ceiling too much moving forward, but it is wild to remember that he's an older player and that there are guys like Elijah Moore who are much younger. We also haven't talked about the Michael Gallup signing, so we can use that as an excuse to talk about Gallup a little bit. And then we can also, I think, talk a little bit about some of the other options, because I do think, I don't know, Elijah Moore, it feels like there's clearly something going on there that for a guy who's 25, got some juice at a premium position, the fact that he hasn't signed anywhere either means he and his representation have a very different view of themselves than what teams have, or there's some kind of major red flag, because guys like this don't hit the market very often, and he's staying on the market. So I don't know that at this point, with the other signings they've made, Logan, going another veteran route seems to make a lot of sense. If it's a vet minimum contract, then whatever. Yeah. But that's kind of where I think the Elijah Moore part of it is. One, what do you know about Moore, if anything? And two, what do you make of the fact that they went the Michael Gallup route, pulling him out of retirement?
Yeah, I think, so with Elijah Moore, like, he's the classic guy, like, where there's smoke, there might be fire. And so what I mean by that is, like, he moved on from the Jets. They traded him, and it wasn't like they traded him for nothing, but it was definitely significantly less than what they got him for. His second round pick, I think they traded him for like a 5th or a 6th. So that's kind of the first thing where it's like, something's going on here. We're not jiving with the current administration, right? Then again, coming out of Cleveland, which is, not known for having the most model citizens of all time, best run organization ever. Like, if you're coming off of a league, there's something about it. Like, you just see it, like, you see that trend all the time. Like, I follow the draft pretty closely, and like Malachi Corley gets cut last year from the Jets, like middle of the season, and everyone's like, we should go sign Malachi Corley. Something's going on with Malachi Corley if that happens, right? He's talented. He's a young player. Like, don't jump on that away.
Teams don't cut the guys they drafted that are cost-controlled assets at premium positions like wide receiver that cost a lot of money if there's not something going on there.
Right. So I think, like, that's what I would say is, like, I don't know anything specifically, but this follows a trend of player that I'm very familiar with, and you're probably very familiar with.
Yeah.
And so
the Jets to Browns pipeline, not great.
Not great. And so, like, we're going to sit on that, and we're going to, like, look, and again, like, if he wants to come in for a vet minimum, that's fine. But also, like, you don't get traded if you're like so I think a really good example of this is, who was the guy that was drafted at Ole Miss a couple years ago? Treadwell?
Laquan Treadwell. Yeah.
Yeah, Laquan Treadwell. So the Minnesota, he was a first-round pick. They hung on to him through hell or high water, right? And so I talked to my buddies up there because he wasn't playing very well. And it's just like, he's the best dude, man. He's the best teammate. He's just not like a great football player, but we love him for the organization. We love him for the culture. And I was like, that's really cool. So they'll, if they've invested draft capital and you are like working every day, you're grinding to get better, they'll keep you around. Obviously, that's not the case with him, right? So again, this is all speculative based on the decisions that have been made around his career. So I would just be, I know he's a fun player to watch. You watch his highlight reel, like, dang, this guy's pretty good, man. He's explosive. He's got some juice. Like, there's that line of trade, not re-signing, makes me a little bit dubious about the player. And again, he might be totally fine. He might be the best guy of all time. I don't know, but that career
there seems to be a pattern here. There's undoubtedly smoke. We don't know if there's fire because we're not reporters who are covering the league like that, but there is smoke, and this team doesn't. I mean, they want the smoke, but not that kind of smoke.
Not that kind of smoke. That's exactly right. So I do think, and so again, I think it's interesting to compare him to Michael Gallup. And I think Michael Gallup is an interesting signing because I don't know if you guys remember, but I think it was 2000, was it 2021?
I believe it was 21. He had 1,100 yards on 66 catches.
He was the dude. He was poised to be the next kind of guy. Everyone was kind of watching his career saying, oh my gosh, this guy's going to kind of take this next step. Then he tears his ACL that year. And then he's kind of rehabbing the ACL in 23 and kind of gets back in 24 or goes to
22, 23. Yeah.
Yeah. Goes to Vegas and then says Vegas is a dumpster fire. I'm going to retire from football. So in terms of this, like Dan Quinn knows him, right? And they tend to kind of like guys that they know. So all of that like personality stuff is no longer an issue. He's on a vet minimum deal for a guy that was a true two for a year, like a high level 2 for Dallas. And you know this guy and you're getting him on a vet minimum deal. So I'd say this is a excellent investment because it's a buy low signing that has a tremendous ceiling if he returns to 50% of the form he was at before. And so that's where this feels like in comparing him to Elijah Moore. They tend to like guys that they know or someone that they know knows directly. And I think that's what you're seeing here is like, why do I want to give Elijah Moore a vet minimum contract when I know Michael Gallup? I know what he's about. I know how he competes. I know how he works. And now I can bring him here. I know that asset really, really well. So to me, that seems like a safer asset. And having coached, like that's something I really value too. It's like, I know what this guy's going to do. Now, can he physically get it done anymore? I don't know. But in terms of the guy he's going to be for our locker room, I feel much more comfortable about that.
Which we, of course, will always highlight. Last year was one of the huge keys to success. That brotherhood, like they didn't just talk about it because it made them feel good inside. Like it brought the best out of everybody. And I think of the inspiration that you get if you're a Terry or whoever else, you're Debo, and you're looking over and watching Michael Gallup, who literally was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, and retires last year. Like those kinds of stories within a locker room and the way they foster that, the way that everyone will know his story in that locker room, like that stuff matters on the day-to-day motivation during the long grind of a season. And Gallup, as you said, basically no risk. Like if it doesn't work and he just doesn't make the team, like who cares? I mean, it sucks for him, and it'd be great if that.
But he was out of football last year. Like, so
for contractual salary cap, et cetera, purposes, for all the stuff that like we kind of tend to talk about in these ways, like except the non-human parts of it, like who cares? And if it works and he's remotely close to what he used to be after some time off, more time removed from the ACL, better environment, all that, like, oh my God, they have a bona fide 2 to go with Debo. Noah Brown becomes like your 4 dirty work guy. Like that would be incredible.
It should be perfect for him.
Yeah, so I think that there's or Noah Brown winds up having what happened in Houston, where he doesn't even make the team because like Luke McCaffrey's that guy, and Luke takes a step. Like there's all kinds of machinations, and I think this is something we talked about with the D line last week. Is like we're gonna spend some time talking about guys that ultimately are not gonna make this football team, and that's good because there are good football players that aren't gonna make it. And I think that becomes especially more true at the wide receiver position, where one of these guys is probably an odd man out. I mean, maybe they carry 6, 7. They've done it before. They carried 6 most of last year, but if they draft a guy as well, that becomes a different scenario as well. So if you look at the top guys, and let's play the 29 game, because we could go on forever. We could do a whole hour on all the pass catchers down the list. But of the guys that could be available at 29, We're talking Emeka Egbuka. We're talking Matthew Golden. We're talking that kind of caliber of player who there's a couple of them that are all very different stylistically. I think Luther Burden is dropping, and I think it's off the field adjacent and stuff that I've heard around that. But let's pretend, like for stylistic purposes, let's just throw him in that mix because he's more of a short area quickness type guy. Egbuka is just like this professional Z receiver. And then Golden's like your super speed guy. If those three styles or those three players or anybody else that you want to throw in is on the board, what's the best fit for their receiver room considering the other moves that they've made?
So first off, if Matthew Golden by some kind of miracle makes it to 29, I think you do a backflip. Like right now, I think he's probably a top 15 player in the draft. Like when you watch his film, it's hard to kind of quantify, but like he reminds me a little of like AB, like Antonio Brown, like when he was at the peak of his power, like not the peak of his powers, like young AB coming in the league. Like he just has this ability to run every route. He doesn't lose any speed in and out of the cut. Like it's a very unique route running skill set. He catches the football at a high level. And so to me,
which by the way, just to underscore, when he doesn't lose any speed, this is a guy that ran sub 4.3.
Right. And he doesn't always play sub 4.3, but like every route's on the table. Like the fundamentals of his route running are tremendous. He makes contested catches. He's got great body control. Like he's a receiver's receiver. So I think he goes top 15. He might go above Tetro McMillan, honestly, like depending on stylistically, like what you're looking for. Like I prefer Tetro McMillan. I think his upside's a little bit higher, but if you just want to get on base, solid football player, he's going to play 10 years in the league, at least based on his college film. Golden seems like the guy. So I think he's kind of out of this conversation, but I think that same conversation in terms of professionalism applies to Emeka Egbuka. Like on the last show we did, I said I have a higher grade on Egbuka than Luther Burden. And one of the reasons is like when you watch his film, that's a pro's pro, man. Like he blocks, he understands how to create separation. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but when you watch the subtlety of his stems, how he does the little tricks at the top of his routes, he understands how to create separation. He's friendly to the football. He's competitive as all outdoors. I personally think he goes before 29. Like I just think there's somebody like Seattle, LA is going to be like, this is perfect for us and what we want to be. And like, let's figure this out. So
he's going to wind up a Ram, isn't he? Son of a
God.
That's
kind of what it feels like, right? Like that's exactly like there's certain guys you watch. And I said this to you last year, like certain players are like, that is a Kyle Shanahan receiver. That is a Sean McVay receiver. And Emeka Egbuka is the archetype of a Sean McVay wide receiver. Like what they do in that offense, he's perfect for that. And again, he might be a little bit redundant with Puka Nacua there, but he's a good football player. So I personally think he's gone. So you're kind of in this Luther Burton, Alec Alamaynor, Jaden Higgins kind of
By the way, I saw Chad Reuter from NFL.com did a 4-round mock, had him going in the 4th. People are all over the place on A.O. Minor.
So when you watch him, I understand that because like I'm a little bit. We did our receiver ranking for Ticket to the Draft podcast for the Commanders, and I had him at like 15. And the reason I have him at 15 is because he's a little bit stiff in the upper back. Like he's like jacked, like he's a big physical dude. Like when you watch him come off the bus, you're like, damn, this dude's big. Like he's a big kind of bodybuilder type build, and so he's a little stiff. Now he's competitive. He runs okay routes. The stiffness kind of hurts him, but he's a good football player. I just think there's other guys that do the receiver stuff better.
All right. Well, I don't know if we stylistically it feels like they're not going to go receiver at 29.
This is kind of what I'm saying. Like unless you're not going in Egbuka, like it doesn't feel like they're going receiver at 29. Unless you really, really love like Higgins, right? Like Higgins is interesting to me because he tested really well. Like he ran the 4.47. He's 6'4.5", almost 6'5". He's got great body control. You watch his film at Iowa State. Runs routes from multiple spots. Got a little Drake London to his game. You know what I mean? Not as physical as that guy because that Drake London's special. Like he's a special football player. Guy. And so again, like this is a different athlete, but maybe I could see him sneaking in and you say, hey, and if Cliff says, man, I love what he does. I love the flexibility he brings to the offense. Maybe you say that's the guy you want to roll with there. But that would be the only one right now. All the other ones kind of feel more like value in the second round type players.
Have no fear. Everyone's screaming at whatever listening device you're using right now or screaming at us on YouTube, going edge, 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 edge. Nothing else matters. We're going to answer an edge question next here on Take Command. Take Command Podcast. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, answering your mailbag questions, including this one from Benjamin, who messaged you on Instagram, Logan. Said, "Hey, Logan, I've got a question for Take Command." And Benjamin, your question was very long, is very good, is very thorough, but I'm going to paraphrase some of it, so I'm sorry I'm not reading verbatim. If we're assuming that edge is preferred at 29, obviously you're looking at an imperfect prospect. Guys in that range appear to be Donovan Ezaraku from BC, James Pierce Jr., Mike Green, Nick Skirton, and Landon Jackson. My question is, since this is such a deep group of edges, is it actually more beneficial to target either corner or offensive tackle and then a bucket 3 rusher in the second round, or take a round 1 edge and see how else the board falls? He then gives a bunch of examples and why he thinks this could be this way in terms of his second and third bucket players and how they fit with the guys already on the team. But the basic crux of Benjamin's very good question is, Logan, when you look at the contour of the draft, and if you've got, Ezaraku feels like he might be in a different class than those other guys, but I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit. By the way, that's who Tony and I took for the Commanders in our little mock draft yesterday. He fell to us. By us to us. But, would you rather target one of those guys that's clearly better because he's a first-round guy, or say, like, you want to know what? We might take a guy that's not as well-rounded, a little more specialized, for whatever reason he might be falling into that 3 or that third bucket of rushers, and take one of the top corners, non-Travis Hunter category, the kid out of Michigan category, at the end of the first round.
Yeah, this is where like a horizontal board is extremely helpful for this type of conversation. So basically, like, there's a vertical board where you take every player and you rank them 1 to 400 or whatever you're doing, right? You just go straight in order, and that's your vertical board, right? Horizontal board is when you kind of lay it out on the wall, right? And you say you have it by position. Positions at the top, rounds on the left, right? And you kind of say, like, who do we have in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and you go down, right? And so the conversation, I think, is really interesting, because is there a player at a different position that has value at 29 that's not an edge rusher? And so this is a really deep edge rusher class. And that's one of the reasons why I've kind of settled on edge rusher at 29. So when you look at offensive linemen, outside of Josh Simmons, I'm not sure I would take any of the offensive linemen at 29. I think I'd probably feel slightly more comfortable with Josh Connerly in like the top or late or like kind of mid-second round kind of level. I think he's going to be a good player, but there is risk associated with the prospect, right? If you want to go guard, I think outside of Brooks, maybe Zabel, I think both those guys go ahead of 29. But for example, if they're there, maybe that's a direction you want to go. And again, I know people don't get sized up for guards specifically, but that's the kind of prospect you're talking about for offensive linemen.
By the way, real quick on the guard front, I think also in Reuters mock draft, the one I referenced earlier on from NFL.com, your boy from Arizona, who we took and got scorched in the comments for in our mock draft last week, he had him going at like 28.
Yeah, dude. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, he's an upside play for sure in terms of athlete playing guard. So to me, like, that's where Jonah S, we're gonna call him, son of Aina, whatever. How do you say his
Dane,
name?
we need the beast with the pronunciation guides. Dane, drop the beast.
So that's where I'd say, but in terms of tackle, I'm not sure you're getting great value there.
Yeah.
So then you move to safety and you say, well, you got Newmanure, you got Starks, who I think Starks should be a top 10 player in this draft, top 15 for sure. I don't think he's going to be there. I've seen a couple mocks with him there at 29. If that happens, yeah, I'm going to take him because he's like a tier 1 player.
He's this year's Cooper DeJean, Brian Branch. Stop over Kyle Hamilton. Stop overthinking the position. Take the good football player. Figure it out.
So yeah, so what I'm saying is there's 2 safeties, there's a couple offensive linemen that kind of fit that mold there. And so all of a sudden you're kind of going through positions. You're like, maybe I'd take Amari Hampton, but I think he's probably going to go ahead of that. I think there's going to be 2 first-round backs. I think you'd probably go, in that 15 to 25 type of range. Colston Loveland, I think, goes ahead of that also, right? So then all of a sudden you're like, well, what positions are available still? So you say corner, right? And Siobhan Revell is a guy that I would die. I would die if he was there at 29. I'd be so stoked. But I think everyone else feels the same way that I've talked to about him. So I think he's probably going to go ahead of 29. So then you're saying, well, who's the corner that you would take there at 29? And I don't have a great answer for you. You're going to take, here, let me pull this up real quick for corners. So you got the kid from Kentucky, Hairston, right, who I like. But again, I think for me, there's a little bit of risk associated with him because of the size, right? I don't love that. And then you say Azaria Thomas, who I love. Trey Amos, Benjamin Morris is like the next tier, of defensive back. And I would be comfortable with probably Benjamin Morris. Azaria Thomas, I love the prospect.
That's who DJ's got, by the way, in his latest mock for the Commanders is Thomas.
And so again, for me, I would say he's a high second round pick. So maybe you feel good taking him at 29. But my point in this conversation is that the value to me screams edge rusher right there, right? Because I've got like 6 dudes that I would feel really comfortable taking there, right? So let me just pull up my list real quick because we were just talking about it. So you got Mbuka, who the question mentioned Mbuka, and I think that's a great guy there in terms of what he would do for the Commanders. I think that would be totally fantastic.
You mean Ezeraku?
Ezeraku, sorry,
Yeah.
Ezeraku. I think he's a great fit for what the Commanders do. I think he's got pass rush upside. He can rush from multiple spots. He's a little undersized, which is why he's there at 30 or 29. But man, they're just a really sharp pass rush project. Nick Scordon, love the dude, man. Love him. Like he just plays with his hair on fire. Landon Jackson, love him too. So there's 3 dudes right there that I would say right now, based on my bucketing system, I would be like at 29. So I just mentioned maybe 1 DB, 2 DBs that I would feel comfortable taking there. And then I've got 3 defensive linemen. We talked about the offensive line. If you don't want to take a guard, doesn't seem like there's going to be great value there at that spot for 29. So again, that's where to me, it just kind of going through it. And I haven't done my full big board. I haven't done my full horizontal board yet, but that's just kind of just going through the names real quick. Why I'm kind of like, feels like one of these guys is going to be there at 29. And so that, and so that's what like back to the original question. Yes, you can get a good value for edge rusher later, but I feel like those 3 dudes I just mentioned are difference makers in a way that those other guys aren't. I guess is my point.
This to me mirrors the conversation that we've been having about the offseason in general, right? People get way obsessed with how you get players. You trade for them. You sign them in free agency. Did you draft them? And I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter because that would be disingenuous and hot takey and incorrect, right? But it matters less than if you got the player right. Like, you know, if you tell me edge or tight end at 29, I'm probably going to tell, like, in theory, I would love the board to fall so that an edge is the best player available.
Right.
Except for the part that if we're taking a tight end at 29, that means Colson Loveland fell. And I would love for Colson Loveland to fall. Like, you know, so actually tight end, because the only way we're taking a tight end at 29 is if he's that much better than everyone else on the board. And so we get obsessed with, you know, kind of the generalities because they're easier to talk about in a lot of ways. And especially when we're talking about picking 29th, like the specifics are so unknown because there's 28 things that are going to happen. I mean, 28 picks that are going to happen. There's 35 things with trades and this and that, and who knows what, you know, what the Commanders have on the ring trade phone coming in. And so I think that is like, these discussions are fun. We're doing a podcast. There's no stakes here.
Yeah.
And so I don't mind the question at all, but I do think a lot of the discourse tends to focus on the wrong thing, which is, you have to do X. You have to take the best available, this position, that position. It's like, no, the devil's in the details of the actual players. And that's why I appreciated your answer is, okay, well, let's look at the actual players. You know, if the options are a position of not need versus need, but the not need position is a significantly better football player, you're just going to take that guy.
Right.
Or maybe it entices you to trade back because someone else wants that really good football player. And now all of a sudden you got multiple, you know, teams on the horn. I was talking about this on the radio show yesterday with Anthony because he's like, would you say, you know, the number one thing is like trade back? I was like, yeah, probably, but you need a dance partner.
Right.
And the thing is too, you actually don't need one dance partner. You need 2 people fighting over you. Because if you're the New York Giants, let's say the quarterbacks go 1-2. Let's say Shador goes 2 to Cleveland, Cam Ward goes 1 to Tennessee. So the Giants are left out of the quarterback conversation at 3. Well, if their plan is to trade back into the first round, that would mean, you know, once you're at 29, that would be a very stupid trade unless you're just dying for that 5th-year option.
Right.
Because none of the teams in front of you were taking a quarterback. You're the first quarterback needy team in the second round. The teams at the end of the first round don't need quarterbacks. That's why they're at the end of the first round. And so you need multiple teams now. You need Pittsburgh. You need whoever else calling the Commanders being like, yo, I want the 29th pick. And now all of a sudden you can call the Giants back and be like, hey, I know you don't want to trade with us. We're your division rival and you were hoping to wait. But if you want Jackson Dart, Pittsburgh's coming up to get him, so beat their offer. And I think those details tend to get lost. And when we make these grand proclamations of they must do this very generic plan, you wind up looking very silly because that's not how the draft ultimately winds up working.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of looking at it. Because again, like I was just thinking, like what else would you do? And there's probably going to be a defensive tackle available, which is not a huge need for the team. There might be a receiver there. We just talked about Mbuka, right? So like there are other options, but it's just like it seems like the value there is going to be really high, and it does feel like a great opportunity to trade back. But sometimes you got to stick and pick, right? And Adam's done a great job, at least last year, of kind of finding like little sneaky ways to get back in the draft a little bit and make some moves and accrue more draft capital, which it's really like a master class. And
then again, everyone's mad at him for trading back because he gave the Eagles Cooper DeJean. So like, do you actually want him to trade back?
We also got Mike Sanders still. Like, I don't care.
Of course,
man. It's like a player's a player, and like I think it depends on what their grades were, and I think it's also like gives you more bite at the apple. Like you get Mike Sanders still and Brandon Coleman. Like, is that better than?
And we'll see if Ben Sinnott can turn it around.
Yeah.
That you get that like 3 players are better than one, even as great as Cooper DeJean was, and help them just win a Super Bowl.
And my general draft philosophy, and I'm just a dude in a room, hanging out with his buddy talking draft, is like you want to pick a lot because it's easier, right? Like the draft is an imperfect science. Like, oh yeah, I'll watch film and do all this stuff, whatever. But like ultimately, like you don't know. It's so subjective, right? I just did running backs on Ticket to the Draft yesterday, and I'm like, the difference between the 10th guy and the difference between the 5th guy is negligible. It's really just how you look at it and how you twist your eyes, right? So if that's how subjective that is, I want to take more opportunities. So to me, it's always good to trade back, especially if you're in that kind of 29 range. And now again, somebody might fall to you, which would be great. We talked about Malachi Starr. I think that's so unlikely, but like just for the purposes of this conversation, like if he's there, like you take him. But if there's nobody there and you're in this kind of doldrum and somebody really needs a defensive tackle, hypothetically, right? And they want to get up there for Kenneth Grant so bad, the kid from Michigan. They want to trade up. They want to make it happen. They need a run-stopping defensive tackle. Like, great, trade out of the spot. I think the mock draft that we did last week, where it was like Colston Loveland was there, and the Chargers wanted to trade up. Like, that's a really good kind of embodiment of what's going on here. Now, I think you probably take Colston Loveland in that case. We didn't, because we played the game. We traded back. But that's kind of what you're dealing with. You need an asset there that people want to get up for, and quarterback, blue chip position, whatever it is.
Yeah, and to that point, right, I would totally agree with you philosophically. More picks equals better. But ultimately the point of the picks is to get good football players,
Correct,
which is why I don't hesitate to trade picks either for good football players. If I can take the risk out of it and trade some picks for Laramie Tunsil, I'm probably wasn't going to draft Laramie Tunsil. So like you have to be able to hold these multiple thoughts in your head at once, and when it comes to team building of like, yes, would I like more picks or less picks? I would like more picks. Unless more picks means that I'm just taking a bunch of chances and never taking any risk with trades, where I have a much higher hit rate because I've actually seen those guys play in the NFL and they have a proven track record. And depending on my financial cap situation, if I can afford the more expensive contract because I'm saving money elsewhere, like a rookie quarterback contract and a rookie cornerback contract, to pretty expensive positions at the top of the market, then sick. Like, let's do that. So it's about using the picks well to acquire good players, whether you actually draft them or whether you trade them. To me, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but like it's almost irrelevant. The point is to get the good players. And
you got to get good players.
That concludes Craig and Logan's draft philosophy. Get good players. We got 2 really fun questions to wrap up here on Take Command, Logan, and we're going to have to rely on your experience for both of these because I never played in the NFL. This one from Brian, a question for Logan. How much does the front office talk to players about other players? For the draft, a player from the same school, even if they never played together, might still have contacts and know inside intel. For free agency, it seems even more significant that a player would have great intel on a potential signing. And the ultimate version, how much do coaches, players talk to players about other players on the team when considering who to retain? Is there any etiquette about this sort of thing? You famously did your own draft evaluations. You ever have a GM ask you for them? But more importantly, on the intel front, I think that's really interesting because you want to use all your resources. You also don't want to put your players in a bad spot. So what's the etiquette and what from the players' side, and how do front offices handle this?
So I think this is good. This is a good question. So what I will say is front offices, scouting departments, if they're good, they'll ask anybody anything. Like I remember, so like last year, this year even, I trained a couple tight ends for the draft, right? For example, and I don't know how they knew this, but someone from the scouting department stopped me the other day in the office and was like, "Hey, did you work with these guys?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Can you give me the 411 on them?" And I said, "Yeah." And so here we go. So I don't know how they figured that out, but they asked me then. And then when I was in when I was playing, like they'd come up to you and be like, hey, did you play with so-and-so? And I'd be like, oh yeah. And like, what do you think about him? And then you just kind of give the little rundown, like, and then they say, oh, well, how's he as a pro? Like, how's he as a worker? And I said, oh, I played with him when he was really young. He hadn't really figured it out yet, but really talented guy, or whatever I'd say. You know what I'm saying? And so I do think like they understand, like the conversations we have in here about prospects and character and all that stuff, they understand that at the highest level. Like they understand like how important that is. And they have a whole staff. Like I was talking to Dan Quinn, I did an interview with him the other day, and I didn't even think about this, but this is so true. Like the reason you have a regional scout is because you get a guy who watches a player, hopefully for 4 years, 4 consecutive years. I follow this guy's career. I talk to the coaches about him. I talk to the janitors about him. I know him really, really well, right? And I think that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is just get every piece of information to help peel back the onion. Because quite frankly, like if he might be different, the guy that they're talking about, he might be different with me than he was with a coach or when he's with the scout. And it's just a way to kind of get in behind the veil a little bit and understand who he is. And it's always a great, like I was talking to somebody the other day, and it's always awesome when it's like, oh, what about this player? A guy that I'm coaching. I was talking to him about a player that he played with in college. He's like, dude, the best competitor, the best dude. And you're just like, and he's not his agent. He's not, he's like, they're not even really friends, but he's like, oh dude, I love practicing and competing against that guy. You're just like, yes. And I think that's ultimately what you're looking for. Just kind of that stamp of just like, okay, like we couldn't get in. Like I was talking to a scout the other day, and he's like, we couldn't get a lot of information from the school because of how they were handling scouts at the school. So I called his high school coach, and his high school coach said XYZ. And it just gave me enough to be like, okay, like it supports the film, it supports the character we've seen. And so they're looking for every possible edge and insight into that person. And I think that is ultimately what you want from a good scouting department is knowledge and familiarity.
So I actually do have something to contribute here because I'm a reporter, damn it. Or used to be. Now I just sit and give opinions all day. But like when you're a reporter, you have to understand your sources. And yes. If I'm not saying this is you, but if I'm going to Logan and he says every guy's the best, I probably am not putting a lot of stock in Logan's opinion on that in terms of the character. Oh, that guy. Oh, yeah, I loved him. And it's like, that guy? No one else has had a good thing to say. And then turns out that guy sucks. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to file that away and be like, I don't know that Logan is a reliable source. So you have to understand who you're talking to. So I would imagine front offices would trust a guy like actual Logan, not fake Logan that I just put out there. Actual Logan, who's going to be honest and really understands what it's like to be professional. Like if you're asking a guy who's a rookie and wasn't very professional in his rookie year about his college teammate who's his best friend, like you got to understand the context there and the positives and the negatives of all of that. So I think that's the kind of funny thing about scouting when it comes to the non-tape stuff is like you're actually becoming a reporter in a lot of ways.
Yes.
You're becoming, an
investigator. One of the scout I talked to at the comment was like, he characterized himself as like, I'm a detective. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
We've seen like former intelligence officials go to front offices and like participate in interviews and stuff when they retire from insert your 3-letter agency here. Like, because those people are professionals, like the ultimate professionals at like understanding people. And that is an incredibly valuable skill to NFL teams. And so, yeah, I love the way you started that answer with like a good scouting department will talk to anyone about anything, but then it's how do you sort that information that becomes really valuable. So I think that's really interesting and definitely great to hear that teams do that. Like, but I'm also not putting the same stock in Bobby Wagner's opinion versus basically anybody else because he's Bobby Wagner, but right. I'm not going to single out anybody else. But like, if Bobby Wagner says that guy's a pro, I'm like, cool. I don't need to do no second sources needed. If some other folks say it, then I might be a little bit more wanting to do some more follow up. Anything else on that before we get to the last question here?
I think this is the best. This is the biggest difference between like what we do, which is like tape evaluation, talent evaluation, and actual scouting. Like the juice is the real like sweet science of the draft and of free agency is determined in this part of the space. And I think it's really relevant because, when our draft discussion, we talked about character, and in our free agency discussion earlier in the show, we talked about character, right? This is where the scouting department really makes their money. Like I had a conversation with a current offensive coordinator, and he was like, I don't need a scout to tell me if a guy can play football. I don't need a scout to tell me if a guy can be a fit anymore. Like it used to be the scouts had to watch film because of how they had to cut film. But now with like PFF, everything's a cut up. Everything's a hyperlink. We can get any information we want about a guy. It's fine. I need to know if the guy's a good dude. I need to know if the guy's wired right. And that's ultimately what the scouts need to do, is be able to come to the coach and be like, this guy had this issue as his freshman year, but he figured it out. The coaches say he turned a corner and now he's become a team captain. Like, I need that guy. That's what this is. And so, like, this is where it's always, I feel somewhat disingenuous doing these talent evaluations, because it's such a small piece of the actual puzzle. It's this other thing that really making good fits for a team.
Right. And by the way, the relationship element of this is enormous, right? If you go to a college coach, and you might have that situation where they say all their players are awesome because they're trying to put guys in the league as high draft picks, which helps them in recruiting and now in the NIL portal and all that. But if you have a real relationship with someone, then they're going to be honest with you. And, they might be like, hey, we had him. I don't know how this dude's going to do outside of our college structured program.
Yeah.
Like, the freedom of the NFL might be a bad thing for him. And so
Right.
you have to, the GMs, assistant GMs, scouts, like the relationships you develop with college head coaches, coordinators, position coaches, janitors, like you said, like all that stuff becomes really, really important. If there's a class that all the athletes take, I want to know the professor. Like
Right.
that's what intelligence gathering is in this space, and that stuff becomes enormously important. All right, last one to wrap up. This was a really fun question that I'm actually very curious about how this changes team to team. Question for Take Command. This was one that we were going to do with Chris, and maybe eventually we'll get Gorez on here and do the crossover episode.
Should be great.
But I assume that the players on last year's Commanders team got some direction on what they should be working on during the offseason. But when does that happen? The day after the season ended sounded rushed, so I don't imagine it was then. He says, I never miss a podcast. Love what you and Logan do. So, Alec, thank you very much. Appreciate the kind words. When do you get your offseason marching orders, and how specific are they?
So, yeah, I mean, usually it does happen the last day. And so what you do is you have a team meeting, and it's like, hey, like real quick, it's like, hey, just so these are the dates we're thinking about generally coming back. Great job on the year. Make sure you check in with the strength conditioning staff. They'll give you the off-season pamphlet. Most guys don't use it. Like, they use it as kind of a template, but like they have their private coaches, or they like to train a little bit differently. Like, I always would take the pamphlet, like read through it and be like, okay, this is generally what they want in terms of getting ready for coming back, and kind of like the notes you want to hit. But I always wanted to kind of do some different stuff than what I did for 6 months or 8 months when I was on the team. So I would kind of train on my own, but that's where they give that to you. And then obviously you have your exit meeting with your coaches, and that can be done in person or over the phone. And usually it's like kind of just a quick review of their high level thoughts of the year. So I would go check in with the special teams coach and my position coordinator, sometimes the offensive coordinator, depending on my relationship with them, and just be like, hey, thanks for a great year, like things to take to the off season. And they'd kind of be like, this, and this, or here's a positive thing that I really like about your game. We need to make sure we're better in this area. And so then I'd try to take that and go make sure I got better at it, in the off season. And that was, sometimes those conversations were really hard, and you're like, oh damn, like I'm in a lot of trouble here for next off season, or whatever. But that's kind of when, and it is a little bit rushed, but it's not like this crazy formal thing. You pop into the office with the special teams coach, and he goes, hey, loved what you did here. You're not great at covering kicks, but we can find a role for you in this other area, and enjoy the offseason. And it's like maybe 3 minutes. Then you go to the position coach, a little bit longer, better relationship there. But that's basically what it looks like. And you have the pamphlet and get out of there.
What is there, like a distinct one that stands out that you remember, good or bad, of a postseason meeting with a coach that set up an offseason for you in a significant way?
Yeah. So the one that I remember is I remember having a meeting with the special teams coach and kind of coming in, and I thought like I had a pretty good year on teams. And he was just like, hey man, love how you work, love how you prepare, but you had too many penalties this year. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. You know what I mean? So like then I had to kind of go back and rewatch some film and be like, how do I clean up some of this stuff? Like some of this stuff is just innate to my game, and I'm kind of riding this risk, like a lot of holding penalties or whatever it was. Like that's just how I got to do that to a certain extent, because I'm not the best athlete, but can I clean up some of this other stuff? And so some of it was snap count related. So I went home and kind of was like, well, how do I make sure that I own the snap count? And so kind of looking through the book, make sure I was familiar with the cadences. And then I realized like sometimes I'm not getting the cadence because I'm thinking about other stuff. So kind of shifting that to the forefront, and that all was kind of an off season, process. And it wasn't every day, but it was just something kind of like touched on like once a week, once every other week, just to kind of make sure it was better. And it did get better, like which was good. But I'm just saying, like, those are the types of conversations that I think are helpful for players, because you don't always get super honest feedback necessarily in season. Like they're thinking about this stuff. So like, it's just a nice like little nugget here. Okay, I can go work on that.
Are those conversations different? Like for you, the first couple of years, you're on your rookie deal. And I know for you, your entire career, you always felt like you were teetering on the edge of the roster no matter what, because you were an undrafted guy. But if you were undrafted, did you have, how many multi-year deals did you sign?
So my rookie year, and then I signed a 3-year deal after that. So pretty much my whole time in Washington. Yeah.
So how different was it? Let's say the first year after you signed that 3-year deal, you're coming back, versus the years that you're a pending free agent, because they'll still talk to you, they'll still give you some stuff. But I imagine those might be a little bit different conversations.
Yeah, much different actually. Like, because when you're on the 3-year deal, you're kind of building with the team, like you're part of. Long term is a relative term here, but like, maybe the next year plans, like you're going to be in for camp, like, and on the 1-year deal, like those conversations where you come in and it'd be like, hey, Logan, we'd love to sign you back. We love what you did this year. And that's more with the conversation, very high level, very superficial.
They don't actually want to sign you.
Well, like, it depends. Like, so I had a conversation with the Bears, and I had I think a really solid year with the Bears, very physical, kind of embodied what they wanted from a blocking Y standpoint. And the GM was like, dude, we'd love to have you back, like straight up. And I just think like they're coming off kind of an emotional year, right? So like in that moment, yeah, we want you back, right? But then they go do their reevaluations. They look at the positions, and they went out and signed like Deion Sims, who was this guy from Michigan State, who was big, a little bit more pass game upside at the Y spot. And that's what my career was. Like, you can always get a little bit better, and if you can, you should. And so I'm not like mad at them for that, but I do think things change as the offseason progresses. And that's how I felt in that conversation. So I didn't get like a ton of feedback from him in that moment, but I'm glad I went and checked in with him, because like at least immediately there was some, and again, like talking to my position coach, talking to head coach, everyone wants you back, but it's the offseason process is long. You got to like reevaluate, reassess your needs as you get some distance from the event. And I think that's a good process. But again, like that's one of the reasons why those meetings at the end of the year on the 1-year deal feel a little bit less tactile, maybe.
Yeah. Last thing on this, because I think this is another fascinating thing, and my trainer brain goes a little bit on this one. Like, you get a piece of feedback. We need you to get a little quicker. We need you to get a little. That's one thing, right? If it's like pure strength and conditioning, like, okay, I can go to my trainer or in your case, a guy who is well versed in this stuff and ultimately now is a trainer yourself. Like, you probably knew how to do that. But when it's like become a better route runner, like those types of things sound straightforward, but like actually doing them, I'd imagine, is hard. Like, how do you become a better route runner? How do you eliminate penalties? I didn't want to try to commit penalties. I can't just like be like, oh, snap my fingers, I eliminated the penalties now. Like, how often do you get feedback? And really, for I think a lot of other players, you're again very well versed, and you would put in the homework and research. But like, how often do you think guys get feedback and they actually don't know how to act on it?
I think it's very often. Now that I'm coaching and I'm talking with about 10 NFL guys, and they come to me with the feedback, right? And I think it's hard to, I think sometimes have a plan for how to get better in those areas. Like, I need to be better on first down. My punch needs to be better if I'm a defensive lineman, or my back pedal needs to be better. I need this one was interesting. My tracking needs to be better. Like how I track the ball carrier, how I track the ball in the air needs to be better. So as a coach, I'm like, that is something that he needs to be better at. But now how do I make sure that they are getting better at it? So I had to come up with like, there's no tracking drills. So like, it's like, I need to get out there. One. Yeah. I need to get out there. I need to run, and he needs to track me, or I need to get a ball. I need to throw it. He needs to track the ball right off the bounce and make sure I'm taking good angles. And I got to evaluate the angle and give him feedback. Hey, you're a little loose there. Let's make sure we're tighter. Make sure we're attacking the backside hip. And just rep after rep after rep after rep. It's like getting a sparring partner, and like that. And I think that's sometimes unfair. These meetings can be unfair, because it's like, hey, we need you to be better at X, but there's no methodology to get there. And so they're kind of left in limbo about how to get that done. Like, and the other thing too that used to bother me as a player, because you said the route running thing, is like sometimes they've pigeonholed you as this player. And so the feedback reflects that player. But I don't want to be this player when I get back. I want to be a better version of myself. So I kind of wish people would have been like, hey, we need you to run better routes. You know what I mean? Like, and I wish that had been part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, they just were like, hey, Logan, we need you to clean up the holding penalties and become the best blocker in the league. And you're like, yeah, but if I can become a better route runner, then I probably would stop getting replaced by guys who are better route runners.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, like, I wish the feedback would reflect that, but they're not worried about you. They're worried about the team. And so I do think, in addition to the meetings being somewhat helpful, I do think it's important for athletes to kind of take back and do a self scout, like, hey, how can I don't be content. Like, I think there was a point in my career, probably year 5, 6, 7, where I was content being kind of this bulky blocking tight end. And it really hurt my career long term, right? So I'm always telling guys, like, think about, again, I was never gonna be, Kyle Pitts, but I could be the best version of Logan Paulsen in that area and spent more time on that skill acquisition. And so I think that's something that I would say too, is like, the meeting doesn't reflect the best thing for you. It reflects the best thing for the team. So like, can you, again, think critically, think comprehensively about what your goals are long term. I think that's important too. And again, developing your own methodologies on how to improve and get better, I think, is incredibly important, but also very, very challenging.
Yeah, as a strength coach, I just think about reverse engineering results too. Like, if our goal is to do this, how do we create the drill? Whether it's with, like, we have these things called blaze pods or fit lights. Yeah. There's another version. Like, can you use those little lights that light up different colors to simulate decision making? Can you, you get a couple people out there and have, a handoff versus play action drill of play recognition. Like, you have to ultimately practice the skill, which is hard because you're not going to recreate a full tackle football game. So it's not like in the NBA where guys get feedback and then they can go play pickup and they can work on their mid post game.
Great point.
Like, it's a totally different thing. So you have to try to create, isolate the skill that you're trying to work on and do it to the best of your abilities in a safe manner, where ultimately then, best prepared for the regular season. It's tough. Football's one of the hardest to train in that way. Like, doing the speed, explosiveness, strength, power stuff, like, that's easy. That's we know how to do that. But
I've actually taken a lot of inspiration from how fighters train, how like rugby players train, because it's like they're similar. You can't just go do rugby. I can't just go fight. I need to skill acquire.
What's our football sparring? I think that was a great way to put it. So, and it's also very, very different based off the position in terms of what you need. So it's a fun off-season's fun. It is fun. And maybe we can get Gorez on to talk about some of the things that he's done with different guys over the years too. So maybe that'll be the fun follow-up to that question if we do that crossover episode. For now, though, this episode of Just Take Command, not the Train with the Best podcast, is over. We'll do another mailbag next week, so go ahead and hit your questions. We also we're gonna do Logan's going on vacation in a couple weeks, and so I'm gonna try to recruit a special guest for a different kind of mailbag. So everyone can look forward to that in a couple weeks. It won't be Chris Gorez. It could be fun, but we're not going to do Chris Gorez. We'll have someone who covers the Commanders, I think, try to do that with us. So looking forward to that. Also working on some guests around the draft, so stay tuned for all that. We'll see you later in the week for another episode of Take Command. In the meantime, have a great week, everybody. And by the way, quick shout at the end here. If you want to come hang out, Logan won't be there, but we're broadcasting live. Nats opening day, Tap 99. So the Hoffman show will be live on Thursday. If you're going to be down around the ballpark and want to come up and say hello, we talk a little football in commercial breaks. I hate when people try to talk to me during the show, Logan. Don't try to talk to me during the show because I'm ADD and I can't focus and I'll get lost. But happy to talk with you in a commercial break. And we'll see you at Tap 99 on Thursday. Before that, there'll be another podcast. That's it. I'm done rambling. End of outro. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.